I'm done adding individual rules, I would just either go to network interfaces and assign it to multiple network interfaces, or go to subnets and say I want to associate it with these subnets. Okay, so you'd pick a virtual network, and then we would pick a subnet, and then we would hit OK, and it would apply that NSG to that subnet. I don't want to do that because it will terminate my RDP because I didn't add the rule. So subnets affect all of the virtual machines within that subnet if an NSG is associated with it, whereas NSGs associated with network interfaces only affect that individual system. But that, as I said, gives us some network layer protection. This is outside of the VM. This is not the same thing as the Windows firewall. In fact, in the last demo, we saw we had to actually go in and turn off the Windows firewall to be able to ping after VNet pairing was done. So, not the same thing at all, but all with the same purpose. Control the types of traffic allowed to and from virtual machines in an Azure environment. The Azure Firewall is a little bit of a different animal. As we said, it's a completely managed cloud-based security service that protects Azure VNet resources. It is a fully stateful firewall as a service. It's got built-in high availability. It's got nearly infinite scalability, and it gives you the ability to create and enforce policies, across one subscription, multiple subscriptions, as well as multiple VNets. Okay. Some of the other features, availability zones. The firewall can be configured to span multiple availability zones. That will increase your high availability, but it is built in to have high availability. So technically there is nothing you need to configure unless you want more availability. You can scale up as much as you need. We can limit outbound HTTPS traffic or SQL traffic to a specific list of FQDNs, and those can include wildcards, and it could be other type of traffic as well, but those are kind of the most common ones. You have network traffic filtering rules, so that allows us to centrally create rules that will allow or deny by the same thing as an NSG: source, destination, IPs, ports, protocols, etc. Okay, but it is stateful. It's got built-in threat intelligence. It's got the ability to have multiple public IP addresses and do things like natting. So, you do have a lot of the same capabilities that you would expect in a normal network-based firewall. There are 3 types of rules for the Azure Firewall. The kind of rule that you configure just depends on what you're trying to do. So the first is a NAT rule. These are destination network address translation, or DNAT rules, that are used to translate and filter inbound traffic to the subnet. And basically each rule in the collection is used to translate a public IP and port to a private IP and port. That's what NAT does. That's when we're trying to essentially publish something behind a firewall. Then we would use a NAT rule. And again, the Azure firewall is no different in that way than a regular firewall. The network rules are whether we're allowing or denying, and this is it has to do with non-HTTP or HTTPS traffic. Okay, so you're going to have to specify the protocols and the source and destination ports. And then you have application rules, and those are going to be the ones that would define FQDNs that can be accessed from a particular subnet. Rules are processed in the order of network, then application rules, and because network and application is controlling whether something's allowed, NAT rule is all about translation, so that doesn't really fit in here. So network first, then application, and just remember, once a rule is applied, then no additional rules are going to be processed by the firewall. So in the last demo, we looked at network security groups. In this demo, we're going to look at the Azure Firewall. Okay, the Azure Firewall is a bit more than the network security group, because the network security group is simply there to attach to network interfaces or attach to subnets, really just kind of doing a packet filtering based on source and destination, IP addresses, protocols, and port numbers. Not to say that's bad, but the firewall is more of a virtual appliance that functions like a perimeter firewall. So you just type firewall into the search, and then we would go and create a firewall. So obviously we need to, like we've done everywhere else, choose our resource group. So we'll just keep going with PL test here. I'm just going to call it the AZ firewall, and we'll go ahead and choose the same region that we are in. And if you want this to be highly available, then you can do that as well. Standard versus premium on the firewall tier. The premium firewall is in preview still, but it has some additional capabilities. And then, do you want to use firewall policies or firewall rules, which is sort of the classic way of doing it. We're going to do the firewall policies. We'll have to create a new firewall policy. All right, and then we are going to put that in our East US region as well. Okay. Virtual network name for the firewall. Okay, firewall VNet, and then the address space that we're using for this. .72.16. What did we do with the others? 3.0/24. Okay. Or I guess. No, we'll do 3.0 and then the firewall subnet. This is my fault. I said choose new. I want to use an existing, okay, and I'm going to use that DMZ VNet. Although it will force me to create an Azure firewall subnet, so maybe not. Okay, we're just going to do this, and then the firewall subnet will be 172.16.3.128/25. Public IP address, we'll just have to add a new public IP address. Okay, hit OK. And we'll go down here. We don't need forced tunneling. We don't need any metadata, so I'm just going to do a validation. And once that validation is there, we'll go ahead and create it. And we can see the deployment is now in progress. And that virtual firewall is being created. Okay, and so now we see our deployment is complete. We'll go ahead and go to the resource. All right, so once it's complete, you can go here and you can, see that we're able to modify the public IP configuration. We've also got access to this firewall manager. And the firewall manager is how you go in and create the policies. And it's also how you, sorry, I clicked on the same thing there. How you create policies and how you add security to virtual networks. So that's kind of the first thing is we need to say, okay, these are the virtual networks that we want to deploy this firewall for. So I just select that and I select that virtual network and it says that there is no firewall deployed, okay? And so we have then the option to deploy a firewall with firewall policy. This is now the connected virtual network. Now this is my specific policy, and then I can hit review and confirm and do it. I'm actually going to go back because I haven't created any rules yet. So really, you probably want to go with the firewall policy first. It's only associated with itself, basically, right now. So we get into that policy, and you can see all of these. Now, as with many of these topics, it's just not, we don't need to go completely into this. Just kind of trying to show you the fundamentals of going in and creating things. So we've got two basic, three, I guess, basic types of rules. You've got dynamic network address translation, where we can do port forwarding on a public IP to a private IP. We have network rules. It's just allowing traffic, okay? And then we have application rules. And application rules would be rules for a particular program or application. So I'll go ahead and, add a rule collection. The rule collection is network. We'll just call it my rules. We can give it a priority. Lower the number, the higher priority. And then these rules are going to allow traffic. And then you can see it's either a DNAT rule collection group, a network rule collection group, or an application rule collection group. So then let's just go allow RDP. Source is a particular IP address. Then we put in the source, but we can do a wildcard. Protocol, TCP, destination ports 3389, destination type IP address, and I'm going to put the 172.16.0.0/16 network. Okay. So basically we're saying any source trying to communicate on RDP, I know we just said we wouldn't do that, but this is just an example. Any source trying to communicate on RDP would be able to communicate through this firewall. And now the public address that people would have to be communicating with would be the public address of the firewall. This is a virtual appliance. It acts like an actual perimeter firewall. So it's still creating that rule, but once you've got the policy created, then we can actually go and associate that with virtual networks and thus apply those policies. So, you might be thinking, well, what's the difference between this and NSG? Well, predominantly it's going to be, you do have some different kinds of rules, especially with the premium firewall. We have more threat intelligence. This is more of a, next generation firewall, NG firewall. And so there are going to be far more capabilities. It's a stateful firewall. It's not just doing packet filtering, things like that. Additionally, we have more of a centralized viewpoint because we're doing it on this appliance. This firewall and its policies can protect multiple virtual networks behind a single public IP. We can add additional public IPs and we can protect multiple applications using DNAT rules and application rules. Okay, so that's really going to be your big benefit and one of the bigger differences here. Looks like we're still creating. Everything is a little bit slow on the firewall deployment, so we'll give that a chance. There we go. Once that is done, let's go back to Firewall Manager. And now we can say, okay, I'm going to deploy this out to this PL test. Now I'm actually going to use the VNet 2. And then we'll go to Manage Security, and we'll deploy a firewall with firewall policy. We select the policy. It passes validation. We hit confirm. Okay, and now it is deploying. So at this point, the firewall is protecting VNet 2. And the firewall policy is defining rules that we can use for VNet 2. Now, actually, one way to test this out would actually be create a DNAT rule for 3389 pointed back to that virtual machine. But again, it goes a little beyond probably where we need to go. The idea here is just kind of to show you the firewall, show you the different components, set up a general policy and rule, and then apply it to a virtual network.